Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. This is lesson 5 of An Inspector Calls, and we are going to look again at the analysis of pages 57 to 63. And if you are in my class 10XB, I've remembered you've got a different book and you are pages 207 to 213. I do not need you to read these pages yet. There's a slide later on, and again, like lesson 4, there's commentary for each slide. There are some interactive tasks that I need you to complete in your books, and there are some Word documents that are also attached to this to assist you with your decision as to who you think Inspector Gall is. So this lesson is going to cover a couple of points. Obviously, we're going to look a little bit more at the analysis of Act 3, and we are also going to make some decisions about who you feel is most to blame for Eva Smith's, Daisy Renton's death. Okay, so next slide. Right, so as I said, you need to decide who's to blame. We've heard about everybody's involvement with Eva Smith, Daisy Renton, and I need you to make some decisions. I need you to think about who is most responsible. I've outlined for you our 5 main characters: Eric, Gerald, Mr. Burling, Sheila and Mrs. Burling. And I would like you in your book to put them into order of who you think. Least responsible to most responsible. You can do it on a sliding scale, an arrow, so left-hand side, least responsible, right-hand side, most responsible. In order to do that, I need you to pause this until you have completed the task. When you've completed it, carry on to the next slide. Right, so now you've made that decision. You've put your characters, your 5 characters, in order. It's not just a question of putting those characters into order. You need to be able to quantify why you think they are most responsible. So underneath your blame slide, if we call it that, I need you to complete a paragraph outlining your view. All right. Can you add some quotations from the text to support your view? You can't just say, well, because I think they are. That's not enough. You need to be able to substantiate your views, your opinions. And if you can use the text, so you can use it from Act 1 to all we've read up to Act 3, then that would be even better. Again, a short paragraph, not a massive paragraph, but this should take you 5-10 minutes time of writing. So again, I need you to pause this slide while you complete this paragraph, and then we will move on. Okay, so we've done our little introduction. We've had some ideas about who we think is to blame. We've substantiated those ideas, and now you're going to read on. So you need to read either pages 57 to 63 or 10XB, pages 207 to 213. So obviously you need to pause this slide until you have read those pages, and then I will come back and we will discuss those pages. Okay, so let's have a little discussion about this. Again, ladies and gents, I am not going to stop and analyse absolutely everything on these pages. You would get my voice for far too long if I was going to do that. So I'm going to talk about specific things, specific ideas, enabling you to annotate. You can find, if you wish, some more detailed analysis to help you using YouTube. Right, so firstly, now that the inspector has gone, we have the Burlings back as they were at the beginning of the play. But you need to consider that actually the way that they are now interacting is very different from the way they were interacting at the beginning of the play. the difference is huge. They were celebrating at the beginning of the play, and now they're not. Now they're blaming each other. We have Burling immediately say to Eric, "You're the one I blame for this." And Eric is the scapegoat. I bet I am, he replies. And then Burling says, "You don't realise all you've done. This is bound to come out. There's bound to be a public scandal." Now, those words, public scandal, who is it that Mr. Burling is worried about? He's only worried, again, about himself. He has not learnt his lesson. Okay, he goes on to say, "I was almost certain of a knighthood in the next honours list." It's showing he's still selfish. He's still ignorant. He has no comprehension as to how he is to blame for this. And Eric laughs at him. Eric's brave now, and Eric laughs at him. For God's sake, what does it matter now whether they give you a knighthood or not? Eric understands. Eric knows what's going on, but Mr. Burling doesn't. And this to-in and fro-in continues, and Mrs. Burling joins in. She agrees with her husband. "Eric, I'm absolutely ashamed of you." Now, is she ashamed of Eric because of what he's done? Is she ashamed of Eric because he's jeopardised her husband's knighthood? They're things for you to consider. And we see here that both Eric and Sheila are quite distressed by what's gone on. We have a huge contrast between the idea of responsibility between the two generations. Eric and Sheila begin to side with each other. And Eric says he knows he is to blame. And Sheila, at the bottom of page 57, she admits, "I behaved badly too. I know I did. I'm ashamed of it." So she's showing she has a conscience. She shows that she understands she needs to take responsibility for what has happened. As we move on to page 58, Sheila carries on, and she actually states to her father, "You don't seem to have learnt anything," showing us, the audience, that she understands, and she's highlighting to us that the Burlings, Mr. and Mrs. Burling, have not changed. And then we move further on. Eric cuts Burling off, cutting in. This is the bravery that he's found from the inspector. He's influenced by the inspector. He feels that actually he can contribute to the family. He does have things that he needs to say. Do you remember what you said to Gerald and me after dinner? You were feeling so pleased with yourself. So we have this reflection on what happened earlier on before the inspector arrived, at how Mr. Burling was saying, "You weren't to take any notice of these cranks who tell us that everybody has to look after everybody else, as if we're all mixed up together." So Eric's now laughing bitterly. He understands that Burling is wrong, that actually everybody does need to look after everybody else, that the whole point of this reinforcement of highlighting that Burling is wrong at the beginning of the play is brought back to us now by Eric. But then towards the end of page 58, Sheila begins to question as to whether the inspector was a real inspector. And as we move on through these slides, which we won't do yet, but as we move on, there are some points I want you to consider. So, Sheila questions, but was he really a police inspector? And this is it, Burling. If he wasn't, it matters a devil of a lot. It makes all the difference. And Burling and Mrs. Burling almost become excited by the fact that, well, if he wasn't real, it makes no difference. It's almost as if they're relieved that they can have got away with this, with what's happening. And we have this big question laying over us. So as we move on to page 59, Eric and Sheila have this discussion, this vocal discussion. And And at the middle of page 59, Mr. Burling is excited by the fact that he's not a police inspector. It's almost as if this time can be ignored, that this responsibility can be ignored. And we move on to page 60 and the continuing discussion. And then at page 61, Gerald comes back. All right, Gerald reappears, and he comes with even more hope. All right, so Gerald reappears. I hope you don't mind me coming back. And it's Mrs. Burling that says, no, of course not, Gerald. Sheila doesn't say anything for the moment. But Gerald's there. He has a reason for coming back. When did the inspector go? A few minutes. He put us all through it warningly. So Mrs. Burling doesn't want Sheila to tell Gerald everything. She wants to keep that a secret. So in the hope that they can hide what their family has done from everybody else. But Gerald's rather excited by the information that he has. And as we move on to page 62, this is where Gerald tells them quite slowly, rather triumphantly, this is going to get him back into their good books. This is going to get Sheila back on side, that the man wasn't a police officer. And then we have a conversation. Are you certain? Yes, I met a police sergeant. They've never heard of him. And we're reminded of the inspector's name. I ask him about this Inspector Gould. And do you remember we previously had the discussions as to what a ghoul was and whether this inspector was real or not. And Gerald also, he's cutting in over Mr. Burling. And then we have some fantastic vocabulary. Burling, he's excited. By jingo, an expression from the Edwardian period. He's really excited, almost like a eureka moment. He's a fake. So Burling is excited. Mrs. Burling is triumphant. They do not have to take any responsibility for what's gone on if this is not a real police inspector. If this is not a real police inspector, they do not have to take the blame. They've no need to feel responsible. And this is where Mr. Burling takes the chance. I'm going to ring up the Chief Constable. And remember, he made a point at the beginning of the play of talking about the Chief Constable, that he knew the Chief Constable. And Inspector Gould did not know the Chief Constable. That might be important when we come to analyse what we think of the inspector and why the inspector was sent. Right, sorry, bells are still working. And then the last part that we're going to look at for this lesson. So Mr. Burling, he's at the telephone and he chooses a number, Bromley 8752. And then we hear half a conversation. I was going to do this anyhow. I've had my suspicions all along. So he's making himself sound more important. Of course, he's had his suspicions earlier on. He hasn't, but he needs to make himself the head of the family again. Colonel Roberts, please. Mr. Arthur Burling here. Oh, Roberts. So we have this one-sided conversation. He spells out Inspector Gould's name again, Goole. And remember, Gould, spelt a slightly different way. Ghoul means ghost, means spirit. And then we have, I see. Yes, well, that settles it. No. He puts down the telephone at the top of page 63. There's no Inspector Gould on the police. That man definitely wasn't a police inspector at all. As Gerald says, we've been had. And you can almost feel the relief that comes from Mr. Burling as he puts the phone down. So they've got good news. Sheila and Eric are distressed. They've taken responsibility. Mr. and Mrs. Burling are still finding every excuse not to take any responsibility. And for them, this is the most important. Inspector Gould is not an inspector. He does not exist. Right, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so like I said, when Gerald returns, he raises doubts about everything that's happened, revealing that there is no Inspector Goole, and so Mr. Burling telephones. So you now need to make this decision. You need to work out who or what you think the inspector was. Attached to this PowerPoint, actually not attached to this PowerPoint, sent separately, so attached to show my homework, there are 3 Word documents which you need to complete. Now, I don't need you to complete all 3 documents. I want you to open all 3 of them and look at the first statement and decide on which is your view. And I want you to complete that sheet. What is the inspector representing? I need you to complete that and fill that in for me, please, ladies and gentlemen. These are ideas that you could consider. So, he knows things before asking. He questions the family one at a time. Remember, we talked about the fact he never shows them that photograph. He does not know the Chief Constable. He stands up to Mr. and Mrs. Burling, even though they are rich and influential and above him in status. And actually, he seems more concerned with the morality of things than the criminal law. He doesn't talk about the criminal law particularly. He talks about the morality. So, as I've said, ladies and gentlemen, there are 3 sheets attached to this. You don't need to complete all 3. You need to pick one of them to complete. And that's the end of today's lesson. Thank you.